Where are you from? And your parents, your grandparents, just how far back can you go? Well, my next guest is the founder of African Ancestry, Inc., and she is helping people from around the world trace their roots hundreds of years. Gina Paige has seen African Ancestry grow to be the nation's leading African-American-owned ancestry tracing company. And thank you so much, Gina, for being with us today.
Thank you.
How does this work?
Well, the process is actually very simple. We use DNA to reconnect people to their ancestries. We look at maternal lineages, mother to mother to mother, all the way back, and we look at paternal lineages, father to father to father, all the way back. And so if I can find your DNA somewhere else in the world today, that I found people with whom you share a common genetic ancestry.
So I come to you, Gina, and I say, I want to know where I'm from, where I'm originally from. I come to you, you're gonna take a swab, a DNA swab. Okay, you take that, and then what happens?
So you actually are gonna do it yourself.
I'm gonna do it, okay.
You would decide, I wanna trace my mother's line. As a woman, that's what you can do.
Okay.
And so you swab the inside of your cheek, and you return the swabs to us. We send it to a lab that, in effect, unlocks the code of DNA that you've inherited just from your mother, and her mother, and her mother. And then my co-founder, Dr. Rick Kittles, then analyzes your DNA against the world's largest database of African genetic lineages to look for a match. And when he finds your matching DNA within that database, then he can determine the present day country in Africa, as well as the ethnic group or groups in that country with whom you share ancestry. And the time frame of that analysis is 500 to 2,000 years. So what we're trying to do is answer the question for people of African descent: where was my family before North Carolina, before Mississippi, before Jamaica, before Brazil, and place that ancestry not just on the continent of Africa, but within a country with specific cultures and traditions.
And I would imagine for people, obviously, of African descent, you can only go but so far back, at least if you're in the U.S. anyway, because of slavery. What are some of the expectations that people come to you with?
Well, the main expectation is that we're going to find African ancestry for them. And that doesn't always happen, because as African Americans, inherent in those two words is a mixture, a mixing of cultures and genetics. And so for about 92% of the people that take our test to trace their maternal line, we do find African ancestry. But for the other 8% of the folks, we find that ancestry either in Europe or among Native American populations. The other thing that people are looking for or expecting is a sense of connection. You know, this is really identity work. It's not really scientific work, it's identity work. It's about knowing where you're from so that you can know who you are. And so I think that's part of the going in expectation that definitely has transformative results in the end.
Do you find that it is mainly, I mean, the name, African Ancestry, do you find that it's mainly just Black people coming to you to have their roots traced, or can anyone come to you and get a fairly good assessment of their ancestry?
Anyone can come to us and get a very good assessment of their ancestry, but our target is African Americans and people of African descent, because we have no other tools. You mentioned it. I mean, you can look at all the census data you want, but we weren't even recorded as people until the 1870 census. And again, we are targeting people who we expect to have African ancestry, but because we're only looking at one branch of your family tree, we don't know what we're going to find.
And because I understand, I was in doing a reading for this interview, I understand that you actually had a white man from Texas come to you and have his DNA analyzed, only to find out that I think it was his maternal ancestor was African, and then he said, do the test again?
Right, he was like, there must be something wrong. I think you've gotten me mixed up. And he actually had taken a test with other companies as well. So I asked him, what did the other companies say? And he had hadn't gotten those results yet, but he never called back. So I'm assuming that while the other companies couldn't tell him where in Africa, they could confirm that it was African.
And I would imagine that for someone like that, that might be really shocking. That might be really jarring. That's something that they're certainly not expecting to hear. For those kinds of results, I mean, how do you even begin to prepare a person for something like that once you get the information back?
That's a great question, and we take that very seriously. What we really focus on is African Americans or people of African descent who don't get African results.
Okay.
And that happens 35% of the time when we're tracing a paternal line. Those lines go back to Europe and not Africa. And while intellectually that makes sense because we know the behavior of slaveholders and slave traders, psychologically, when you're looking for Africa and we tell you Europe, that can be damaging. And so when you order the test, we tell you there's a 35% chance. When you get the test, we make you check off that you know that there's a 35% chance. And then when we communicate the results, we explain that this doesn't mean you don't have any African ancestry. It just means that there's a European ancestor in your broad family tree.
I'm curious how you got started. So there's obviously a heavy technological component to what you're doing. How did you know that this is what you wanted to do or this was the company that you wanted to build?
Well, you know, the community really started the company. It's a perfect example of supply and demand. When the community found out that my business partner was able to do the actual research, the genetic research, he got inundated with requests. So I knew as a business person there was a demand, and that made it a lot easier. But I just jumped in.
Wow. Is there anything that surprised you? What you thought it would be like running this kind of a company and what it's actually turned out to be like?
Absolutely. We don't have enough time for that. But what I will say is I don't think I really understood the significance of the identity play. I thought we'd be giving people information that they could use however they chose. And that's what we do, but we really are helping people to transform the way they view themselves and the way they view Africa. And that is a very serious responsibility and one that has evolved and one that we embrace and we have fun with.
And your company has worked with a lot of notable individuals who have traced their roots. We actually have images of some of them, I understand, Oprah Winfrey, Condoleezza Rice, Alfred Woodard. Condoleezza Rice and Alfred Woodard, I understand, actually come from the same tribe. Is that correct? And where is that?
Well, it's in Cameroon, and I believe that they are the Tikar people of Cameroon.
And what about Oprah Winfrey?
Oprah, we traced through the PBS special African American Lives, and we found her maternal ancestry among the Pele people living in Liberia today.
And Whoopi Goldberg, as well as Judge Glenda Hatchett.
Yeah, Judge Hatchett was a fun one. She actually did a whole show and helped a young person trace their ancestry in order to try and turn his life around. And then they surprised her with her results at the end. And she and I actually share a common ancestry among the Hausa people living in Nigeria today.
Which begs the question, where are you finding most of the ancestors? Are they all from Western Africa? Are there certain pockets where you're finding more versus others? Well,
we have found results in 27 African countries, but the vast majority come from West Africa, obviously, because of the transatlantic slave trade. And then the countries there are Nigeria, Cameroon, Sierra Leone, we find a great deal of results from, as well as Guinea-Bissau.
Yeah, to me, I find it really exciting. I'm first generation born in America. Both of my parents are from Jamaica. I can probably go to great-grandparents, my grandparents, and I know where my great-grandparents are from. And then after that, that's it. Don't know where to go. And that has to play out over and over and over and over. For people who have attempted to do research, they go online, they go to Google or wherever, at what point will they eventually have to go the DNA route? Do you think it's inevitable if you are a Black American?
I think it's inevitable if you want to know where your ancestors were before the slave trade, because again, we weren't recorded as people until the 1870 census, and then when you look at slave records and plantation records, our names weren't recorded. We were property. And so unless your family was like Alex Haley's family and passed along that oral story from generation to generation, you have to use DNA. Unfortunately for us as a culture, but fortunate that we have the technology to answer the question.
To actually do it. And we're actually going to be speaking with a woman who worked with you and was able to trace her roots all the way to West Africa, and she's going to talk about how that was really a life-altering, for the good, experience for her. Well, as always, I always want to hear from you, so please head to Facebook and Twitter. Join the conversation at #OurTakeArise, and of course, remember to leave your comments on our Facebook page, Our Take on Arise TV. And you are watching Our Take. Founder and president of African Ancestry, Gina Paige, is with us today on Our Take. African Ancestry is the only company of its kind that traces DNA of African Americans 500 to 2,000 years ago. People can trace their DNA back to the exact country and tribe. Over the past 10 years, the company has traced the ancestry of more than 30,000 people. Also here with us is Sharon Dennis Wyeth, a children's book author who discovered her ancestry was in Cameroon and embarked on an incredible journey. Sharon, what made you start on this path?
Well, I've always wanted to know who I am, in a sense, and that had very much to do with knowing about my African ancestry. I started asking stories of my grandparents on all sides, on both sides, from a very early age. Did a lot of genealogy when I became an adult, hooked up with distant cousins who also were impassioned about that, but I had given up on knowing where on the continent my African ancestry originated. It was very important to me to have that story. And then I heard about African ancestry, and I had 4 tests done. Myself, my brother, and 2 of my first cousins on either side of the family. My maternal line went back to Ireland. That's something that I had learned as an adult, and I was quite surprised because I always assumed that it was the other way around, as Gina had said. Often that's the case. And on my father's side, gee, go figure, Portugal. The Portuguese were very much a part of the slave trade. 2 of my first cousins volunteered to help me find the locations of Cameroon, the Tikar, the Fulani, and the Hausa tribes, and Guinea-Bissau. And I went to Cameroon eventually.
And Gina, you did say that at a certain point, when it comes to African Americans trying to trace their roots, they will have to go the DNA swap route.
Yeah.
You're going to hit a wall.
Yeah, it's inevitable.
There's no getting around it. What was it like for you, Sharon, when you finally had the confirmation of your roots? What did that feel like?
It was really one of the most significant experiences of my life. I had always felt that I knew the story was incomplete, but I'd always felt a sense of discomfort in my identity. I don't know why. I think obviously my light skin may have had something to do with that, because I was brought up in the Black community, and many other people in my family have light skin, but I felt quite different often in certain settings. I just wanted to know. I also felt it was terrible that I didn't know the location and the names or some little fact about my ancestors. It was as if they had been forgotten. And as a child, I took that to heart. You know, when I got the news, I felt a great relief. And when I went to Cameroon, I felt so at home. And it really did. I did experience a shift in my psychology.
When you went to Cameroon, what was the reception that you received upon getting there?
We were welcomed wherever we went. every place from a school where I eventually became a member of the board, and the children entertained us. It was so phenomenal. We met the Prime Minister, and then citizens, private citizens. One citizen actually gave each of the people, the 28 or 54 people on our first trip, a quarter of an acre of land to guarantee, in a sense, that we had a place, that's right, a piece of home.
And as a children's book author, I can only imagine it had to change your story somehow.
Oh, yes. For years, identity has been a theme in my writing, and I've written historical fiction as well as contemporary fiction. But this is, I'm able to somehow complete the story, and I'm working on a nonfiction book now that puts all the pieces together. Knowing where we come from and our personal history, I think, is very grounding, and it's especially important for some children.
And Gina, you mentioned earlier that what you've discovered in providing this service, that it's not just about the data, that it is about something a lot more broad and a lot more personal, that inner knowledge of knowing where you come from.
Yeah, and we see it. I mean, the first thing people do is they feel this sense of pride. They feel this sense of belonging. They feel this sense of place. And whenever I tell a black man that he's Mandinka, he always does like this. Yes. It doesn't matter where I am. It doesn't matter who he is. So we have this longing, and someone put it to me this way: you don't really understand how important it was that you didn't know until you know.
Was that the case for you, Sharon?
Oh, yes. I felt, I knew it was important, and I'd been collecting stories for years, and one day I said to my brother, well, I guess I have to give up, and that was when I discovered African Ancestry. But having the experience and actually being there and smiling at people that smiled back in a way that seemed so familiar, dancing, I just couldn't control myself.
She danced everywhere.
It was really, it became my MO. I just loved it. Yeah, I felt like I had, that I made sense in some sense. Who I am made sense.
And I understand that there was a reenactment, a Bimbia
Yes.
reenactment, which I believe we actually have footage of. Walk me through this. What was going on here?
Well, we were taken to a place in southwest Cameroon, a small village up in the jungle, a wonderful reception, then taken by jeep to a location near the seashore where we were told there were the ruins of a slave-holding, in quotes, fort. That's all we were told. At a certain point, we had to get out of the jeeps and walk for quite a ways, maybe a mile, through the jungle. There's a path. And the people who were members of this village had taken on the roles of actors, and they reenacted the condition of slavery. It was truly moving, and it was really quite shocking because you feel it in your body then. You're walking the walk, and then suddenly you're there with a human being with a chain on. Then we sat down in the jungle, and they put on a play, and someone pretended to be a Portuguese trader, and someone pretended to be a chief, and then here are these actors, these wonderful people who lived there, kind of embodying an experience that had really shaped our psychology. Then they went off in long boats, wow. and we watched them disappear. People in our group were crying. It was really extraordinary. I was very moved. And suddenly they turned around, and there were smiles on their faces, and they got out because they're actors, and they all embraced us. And it was a wonderful healing experience, not only for the visitors who were coming home, in quotes, but to the people who lived there, whose ancestors had been a part of the slave trade. That was a huge thing, to have someone from the area stand up and say, we were part of this. We apologize. This is a big cultural experience, and you have borne the effects of it. It really wasn't that long ago, even though people, I think, want to pretend and cut it off. We are still living out that experience.
Certainly. And I understand that you actually have a name change. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. At a certain point, we were at a wonderful party, but tribal chiefs and leaders had come from all over the country to welcome us. It was a national event, and there was a king of the Tikar people there, and that's one of my original tribes. And I asked if I could have a name, and he gave it to me right away in a ceremony. And of course, I haven't changed my name, Sharon, but it's something that I cherish. Yanke is the name, and it means Princess of the Kingdom and Chief of Women. And he wrote it down for me. It's very, very special. So I think maybe my ancestor was, named Yanke in my mind. I mean,
Sure.
Names are important.
That's a beautiful experience, and that's certainly something that I'm assuming you didn't necessarily expect when you first did the DNA swab.
Absolutely not. The Arc Jammers are this wonderful group of musicians, Cameroonian musicians, and they invited a group of us that African Ancestry had identified as being originally from Cameroon to come and see the country and set up a tour for us. And they paid for all of it. It was truly a gift, and it was also a national gift. The country, we were the first descendants of their enslaved to be welcomed home. Yeah.
Oh, well, Sharon, thank you very, very much for sharing your story. And thank you, Gina. This has certainly been enlightening, and I can only imagine how many more people are hoping and waiting for a similar kind of experience. And Sharon, I'm sure one day we're going to see this story in print.
Yes, this is my book now, The Granddaughter Necklace, and this traces my family back for 6 generations. The woman on the cover is my grandmother, and goes back to my Irish ancestor. I also confirmed that through African Ancestry.
Very nice, ladies. Thank you,
Thank you.
Gina
Thank you very
Paige
much
from
for having
African
us.
Ancestry, and Sharon Dennis Wyeth, who used African Ancestry to trace your roots all the way back to Cameroon. Thank you, ladies. And you are watching Our Take.